All right, so ready to dive into some seriously infamous crimes. Today we're looking at crimes that shook America. Not just, the headlines, but the ones that really left a mark.
Yeah, we're going to try to figure out what makes a crime century defining. What takes it beyond just a shocking news story and turns it into a cultural thing, shapes laws, sparks debates, even ends up in movies and books, right?
Exactly, and we've got a really interesting mix of sources to work with today. We've got Time Magazine's list of crimes of the century, always a good starting point.
Always.
Then some deep dives from FBI case files. Those are always fascinating. And just to shake things up a bit, we've got some lesser-known cases from a blog called historicalcrimedetective.com.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we're talking everything. Kidnappings, murders, robberies, you name it.
So basically, it's like a journey through different types of crime and how they reflect, the anxieties, beliefs, all those cultural shifts of different eras.
Absolutely. Let's kick things off with kidnappings. Those crimes that, let's face it, terrify every parent. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a case that embodies that fear more than the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Lindbergh case, the 1932 kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr., the son of, the famous aviator, total national tragedy, had ripple effects across, all of America.
Yeah, both Time and the FBI really highlight how this case completely changed the way we think about child safety and, the role of law enforcement. It's crazy to think about it now, but before this case, kidnapping wasn't even a federal crime.
It's wild, right? The public outcry after the Lindbergh case, though, it led to the creation of what we now know as the Lindbergh Law, and that made interstate kidnapping a federal offense. And it really, supersized the FBI's role in these investigations.
It's amazing, right, how one horrific event can reshape an entire system. And this case, I mean, it was a media sensation, right?
Huge. It became a symbol of so many things. Lost innocence, the dark side of fame, how even the most powerful people are vulnerable, and it captured the public's imagination. Obviously, media coverage played a role, but also, I think it really tapped into some deep anxieties at the time. Like post-war America was going through so much social change, and the idea of this young, innocent child being taken, I think it just shook people to their core.
Yeah, totally. Now, let's jump ahead a few decades to another kidnapping that, I mean, captivated the whole nation, but for totally different reasons. We're talking about the Patty Hearst case.
Oh man, this one is it's wild. So in 1974, Patty Hearst, who was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, the super wealthy newspaper tycoon, is kidnapped by this radical group. They call themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army.
And then get this, she ends up joining them, participating in bank robberies and everything.
Right. The Hearst case, it throws everything up for debate. Brainwashing, coercion, the whole psychology of captivity. It even put the term Stockholm Syndrome on the map.
For those who don't know, Stockholm Syndrome is that thing where hostages develop positive feelings toward their captors. Sometimes they even start to identify with them. It's a complicated phenomenon, right?
For sure. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around how someone could sympathize with their kidnappers.
Exactly. And the Hearst case, it really just brought all the complexities of Stockholm Syndrome into the light. It made everyone ask, how far can you push someone before their loyalties actually shift? What happens to our sense of self when we're under that kind of extreme pressure? And these are questions that, honestly, psychologists and legal experts are still wrestling with today.
Big time. The Lindbergh and Hearst cases, they're both obviously horrifying, but in a way they pushed us forward, helped us understand things about criminal psychology and how law enforcement needs to work. But they also show how these crimes, they stick with us. They freak us out, make us ask questions about human nature and how fragile social order really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those are just two of the really well-known kidnapping cases. There were others that, left a lasting impact too. The sources we're looking at mentioned the Charles Ross kidnapping. This was back in 1874. It's considered the first ransom kidnapping in America.
And tragically, it's still unsolved, right?
Yeah, wild. And then there's the Weinberger kidnapping in 1956, which involved, a 1-month-old baby.
Awful. The FBI website goes into a lot of detail about this case. It led to this massive manhunt, and it ended tragically. Sadly, the baby was found deceased, abandoned in a wooded area.
It shows the devastating consequences these crimes have, for the victims and their families. It's not just a story, it's real life.
Absolutely. And it shows how kidnapping as a crime, it's evolved over time, the motivations behind it, and how we keep trying to fight it.
Speaking of evolving motives, there's this case from 1910 that the Historical Crime Detective blog mentions, the murder of Samuel Jacobson by Sidney Bell.
Yeah, this one isn't a kidnapping exactly, but it does involve this confession from Bell where he admits to being involved in, I get this, 65 robberies.
65. You got to wonder how many crimes, even the ones committed by people who are eventually caught, how many just go undetected?
Right. It makes you think like official crime statistics are just the tip of the iceberg. But let's maybe move on from abductions for now. Let's talk about a different kind of darkness, murder.
Okay, so when we talk about murders that shook America, the Black Dahlia case has to be, right up there.
Oh, absolutely. 1947, the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short. This was a young woman who wanted to be an actress. It gripped the whole country, the gruesome details, and the fact that it's still a mystery.
Yeah, that Time article really paints this vivid picture of Hollywood after the war, a city of dreams, but also, shadows. And then you have Short, brutally murdered, her body posed, mutilated.
I mean, it's no wonder it captured the public's imagination, right? It was gruesome, for sure. But I also think it tapped into those anxieties of the time. Hollywood, it represented this, like, glamorous escape, but this case, it exposed this darkness lurking underneath. And the fact that we still don't know who did it, it just adds to that whole mystique.
The FBI website says that despite, tons of leads and suspects, the case is still open. Even with all the advances we've made in forensic science, some crimes just stay with us, haunting us with all those unanswered questions.
It's true. And speaking of haunting, our time list has some of the most notorious serial killers in American history, too. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Those cases are just, chilling. How can people who seem so, normal do such horrific things? It's hard to comprehend.
Yeah. And there's a History Channel source that goes deep on H.H. Holmes. This guy was a serial killer in the late 1800s. He built this hotel in Chicago, designed it for murder, secret passages, gas chambers, even a crematorium.
It's terrifying to think someone could be so, I don't know, methodical and cruel.
It's a lot to process, but, Holmes, Bundy, and Dahmer, their crimes actually led to big advances in, like, criminal profiling and forensic science. Law enforcement had to adapt, had to find new ways to understand and track these killers. They didn't fit the usual patterns.
So it's grim, but even in the face of that kind of horror, there could be progress, right? But while we're, digging into these darker parts of human behavior, it's important to remember
That most murders, thankfully, aren't committed by serial killers. They don't involve some, elaborate plan. Most of them are committed by people the victims knew. And the reasons are usually things like rage, jealousy, or just plain desperation.
And like we saw with the Sidney Bell case, even crimes that seem ordinary can have a huge impact on people and communities.
Totally. It's a good reminder. Every murder, no matter how famous it becomes, leaves behind so much grief, trauma, and this long search for justice.
So we've covered kidnappings, murders, but crimes of the century can be all sorts of things, right? Ready to jump into some other categories.
Yeah, let's do it.
From daring heists to acts of terrorism, the next part of our deep dive is going to be just as fascinating. All right, we've explored the dark world of kidnappings and murders, but like we said, crimes of the century come in all shapes and sizes, right? Let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about robberies. The kind that grab your attention because they're so audacious, so big.
When you talk about audacious, you got to mention the Brinks robbery of 1950. Has to be up there, right?
Oh, for sure. Time called it like one of the most meticulously planned and executed robberies ever in America. 11 guys, Halloween masks, the whole bit.
And they got away with over $2 million bucks? Think about that in today's money. That's like over 20 million.
It's just mind-boggling. The planning, the coordination. The FBI website goes into it, like the whole years-long investigation, how they finally caught them, the convictions. I wonder, do you think it was the sheer amount of money that made this crime so infamous?
I mean, it's a factor, right? That was an insane amount of money back then. But I think it was also how well planned it was and the fact that they almost got away with it. It became this symbol of like criminal genius on one hand, and then on the other, law enforcement's determination to bring down even the most sophisticated crooks.
It also, raised questions about security. If they could pull this off in 1950, what does that say about security today?
Exactly. It made everyone rethink how they were doing things. Like, no matter how secure you think you are, someone's always trying to figure out how to get in. Speaking of robberies that captured the public imagination, can't forget the Great Train Robbery of 1963. This one, it was in England, but it made news globally.
That's the one where they stopped a Royal Mail train, right? Got away with like 2.6 million pounds in cash.
Yep, that's the one. The scale of it, the planning, and how they vanished for days, it was a sensation. Pure movie material.
I can see why they made so many heist films based on it. The Great Train Robbery became this, like, legend, right? Admired for the daring, but obviously condemned because, well, breaking the law.
Totally. It had that Robin Hood vibe, like outsmarting the system, even if it was for the wrong reason. Okay, let's jump to a different kind of crime, the Unabomber. Almost 2 decades, mail bombs, targeting academics, business people.
Scary stuff. A real example of domestic terrorism. Ted Kaczynski, the guy behind it, super smart but deeply troubled. He thought technology was ruining society.
He was a total recluse, living in a cabin, no connection to the world. That manifesto he wrote, the one they ended up publishing in newspapers, it laid out his whole anti-technology philosophy, why he thought the bombings were justified.
Time and the History Channel both talk about the fear. People were terrified to open their mail. No one knew who'd be next.
And it made everyone face the fact that extremism can come from anywhere. Like, it challenged the whole idea of who a terrorist could be. This wasn't some foreign group, this was homegrown.
Plus, it was hard to profile him, track him down. Lone wolf, no real network, pre-internet, pre-social media. Investigators didn't have those tools.
And publishing that manifesto, that was a huge debate. Did it give him a platform, amplify his message? Or was it the only way to maybe identify him, stop the attacks?
That's a debate we still have today, right? Especially with everything online, how extremist ideas spread.
It's complicated, for sure. No easy answers. But we've been talking about these huge cases, the ones that made headlines everywhere. But it's important to remember that even smaller crimes, they can have a big impact too.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to that historical crime detective blog and the story of Black Bart, the stagecoach robber.
What's so interesting about Black Bart is he was known for being polite. He even left poems at the crime scenes. Stagecoaches, yeah, but he never hurt anyone physically.
He sounds like he belonged in a Western, not real life. Robbing stagecoaches and writing poetry. Not your typical outlaw.
Exactly. That's what made him so intriguing. He became a kind of folk hero, more for his wit and daring than for being, brutal.
It shows how we remember criminals, right? It's not always about the crime itself. History gets told from different perspectives, and sometimes even lawbreakers get romanticized.
Definitely. It speaks to that whole outlaw archetype, the person who lives by their own rules. That theme, it comes up in a lot of the crimes we've talked about, the Brinks robbery, the Autumn bomber.
Yeah, there's this, I don't know, fascination with people who break the rules, even if what they're doing is criminal. It's like all these cases together, they show how complicated the relationship is between crime, society, and how we react to people who push those boundaries.
That's a great way to put it. And as we, kind of wrap up this part of our look at these infamous crimes, I can't help but wonder, what about the crimes happening now? Which ones will people be talking about a century from now?
It's a good question. What will define our time? Which crimes will be those cultural touchstones we keep talking about?
And what will those future crimes of the century say about us? About our values, our fears, how we see justice? We've covered a lot of ground, but we've barely scratched the surface.
We definitely encourage everyone to check out the sources we've been using, dig a little deeper into these stories. And as we move to our final section, let's keep thinking about that question. What makes a crime truly century-defining? Going through all these crimes of the century, it seems like there's this constant clash between, like, what people want and what society expects. Individual ambition versus the rules.
Yeah, that's a good point. We saw it with the Brinks robbery, how meticulously they planned everything. The Unabomber, all that rage against the system. Even those serial killers, Bundy and Dahmer, their own twisted desires. It's like this constant push and pull between what someone wants and, well, the boundaries of morality and the law.
And when those boundaries get crossed, the fallout can be, devastating. What pushes someone to that point?
It makes you wonder. And what makes some crimes stand out in our memory more than others? It's a whole mix of things, right?
For sure. Speaking of ambition gone wrong, Time brought up a couple of cases that show the dark side of fame. The Fatty Arbuckle scandal, that was 1920, and then the Lana Turner thing in 58.
Oh, yeah, those are interesting. They show how celebrity, even back then, could be a double-edged sword. Fatty Arbuckle, he was huge in silent films, a comedy icon, but then he's accused of manslaughter. Actress Virginia Rappe died. He was acquitted, but his career finished.
It's like a reminder that public opinion can change so fast. Even the biggest stars can be brought down, sometimes just by accusations. It feels like sometimes the media frenzy takes over,
Totally. Imagine how those cases would play out today. With social media and everything, then there's Lana Turner, that whole love triangle, stabbing, a Hollywood scandal that everyone was talking about.
Classic film noir, right? Dark, cynical, crimes of passion, the whole eight. The Lana Turner case fits right in.
Doesn't it? Her daughter, still a teenager, accused of stabbing Turner's boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, during a fight. Domestic violence, the pressure of fame, that line between your public image and your real life, all those themes swirling around.
It's like, even in that glamorous Hollywood world, there's this darkness underneath. Okay, let's talk about crimes that mess with our sense of reality, like hoaxes and frauds, the things we want to believe, even if they're not true.
Ooh, good one. Time mentions the fake ape man from 1912. This fake fossil, they said it was the missing link between humans and apes.
And it fooled a lot of people. Scientists, the public, everyone was fascinated by evolution, where we fit in.
Shows how curious we are about our origins, but also how we sometimes look for things that confirm what we already believe, even if it's a lie. Gotta be skeptical, think critically, especially when someone's making these huge claims.
Yeah, wanting to believe something can really cloud your judgment. It's amazing, though, how all these crimes, even the ones that seem kind of outlandish or even funny now, they teach us about ourselves, about society, about how the law and investigations have changed.
They're like snapshots of different times, showing us the anxieties, beliefs, what people were obsessed with. Ready for one more just to throw you off? The Historical Crime Detective blog has this case from 1910, not a crime exactly, that had a huge impact. The San Francisco racetrack fraud.
Oh, yeah, where they rigged the horse races, cheated people out of their money. Crime could be anywhere, right? Even something that seems harmless can be twisted for profit.
It shows how appealing gambling is, the hope of getting rich quick, how some people will do anything to get ahead. And it's over 100 years old, but it still feels relevant today, Financial scams, manipulating systems for personal gain, what's happening right now that we don't even know about.
That's a good question to think about. So as we wrap up this look at crimes of the century, it's clear that there's no simple answer to what makes a crime stand out. It's the scale, the impact, the conversations it starts, even if it's something totally unexpected or strange.
We've seen how these crimes changed laws, showed up in pop culture, even forensic science forward. But maybe the biggest takeaway is that these crimes, even the horrible ones, the ones that fascinate us, they're all stories about people.
People who were victims, people who committed the crimes, the investigators, the whole communities affected by what happened. By looking at those stories, trying to understand the why, the context, what it all meant, we learn more about ourselves and this complicated world we live in.
So as you think back on all the crimes we talk about, think about this. What crimes are happening now that people will still remember 100 years from now? What will those crimes tell us about our time, what we valued, what challenges we were facing?
That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.